example of the growing impact of Catholic hospitals is unfolding in Washington state. According to a recent ProPublica report, despite Washington state's recent victories for pot legalization, marriage equality, and reproductive rights, one area where voters haven't had much of a say at all is in the wave of mergers and alliances between Catholic hospital chains and secular taxpayer-supported community hospitals. By the end of this year, the ACLU estimates nearly half of Washington state's hospital beds could be under Catholic influence or outright control. The scenario is a common one. Taxpayer support hasn't been enough to keep many of these hospitals afloat on their own, so they seek out alliances to stay open. And if that alliance is with a Catholic institution, they would be likely bound by the ethical and religious directives for Catholic health care services. Among those directives, it is not permissible to initiate or recommend treatments for sexual assault victims that have as their purpose or direct effect the removal, destruction, or interference with the implantation of a fertilized ovum. In other words, not only do these hospitals deny rape survivors abortion access, information, or counseling, they also deny them the emergency contraception, which is routinely provided to sexual assault survivors, so that they won't have to face the possibility of carrying a pregnancy resulting from rape. Washington's Democratic governor and attorney general are both fighting back, directing the state's Department of Health to update its hospital merger oversight process and require that all public hospital districts that offer maternity service also provide birth control and abortions. But it remains to be seen how effective that they're going to be. Now, one of the questions I had is, so if you end up with delayed access and negative health consequences as a result, are Catholic hospitals, because they're operating under this directive, somehow free from tort and malpractice suits? Because typically that's the thing that sort of pushes providers to behave in one way or another.
There have been cases of rape victims suing when they were not given emergency contraception. The problem is, in the cases where they sued, they were denied the information, but luckily they didn't become pregnant, so there was no damages that they could prove. The Catholic hospital has been getting better on this problem of emergency contraception for rape victims, but it's still inconsistent. Really, the biggest problem now, and it's at these Washington cases that you spoke about, is these emergency services and also tubal ligation.
You know, this point that was made earlier before the break, that it actually matters sort of bishop to bishop, that surprised me. I guess I was thinking that the Catholic Church was a little more hierarchical in that sense. So if we were to see new policies coming out from the Vatican after Pope Francis's great survey, how long would it take for that to impact a Washington Catholic hospital or a Connecticut one?
It seems like it could take a while, although sometimes some things have happened quite dramatically in a fairly short period of time in the Catholic Church in the 1960s, and that Pope coming in, John the 23rd, setting a new tone, seemed to make a change, not just because you had to get rid of some older, stodgier people maybe who were very conservative, but because deep in the hearts of a lot of those bishops, they were looking for this breath of fresh air, and he authorized it. So the influence would be on, I think, like it always is with the Vatican, it's a political dimension as well. There's negotiating behind the scenes. There's pressure that their offices could put on national conferences. But a change on hospital policy in the U.S. would be, you know, getting kind of the key cardinals and leaders in the U.S. to work in the Conference of Catholic Bishops to make adjustments in the healthcare directives that guide hospitals.
And it feels to me like that's important, in part because for communities, the choice between no hospital and a Catholic hospital might often lead to them saying, okay, well, then we're going to choose the Catholic hospital because there are so many kinds of services that communities need.
Absolutely. In the state of Connecticut, I work for the Permanent Commission on the Status of Women, which looks at public policy around all women's issues. And one of the things that government needs to do is to determine how it's going to help reimburse medical services. And if it's a legal service, do we let one religious stand dictate to an entire community what's going to be happening and what's available to those members of the community? And I think that's really an important key link that we need to be aware of is there may only be one hospital within that community for hundreds of miles. I mean, this is not just a matter of going to the next hospital that's the next town over, but if the next hospital that might even provide the service you're looking for is 50 miles away and there's no transportation to get there, then government we believe, has a role in playing and setting the standards around what services are available in those communities. So, you know, hospitals, whether they are Catholic or not, provide a service to the community. They need to let the community know what services are being offered and how they're going to support what services are not being offered.
One of the things you said is if a procedure is legal, then, you know, and then we go on to access. And so I wanted to ask you just finally, doctor, on this question of access, it feels to me like one of the possibilities here is that there's a bigger coalition, that when we talk about abortion and termination services, it sometimes shrinks the coalition. But if we talk about tubal ligation and IVF and all of these other sort of women's reproductive health services that are legal, right? And we grow that coalition. Is that part of how we can make this push?
And in fact, we know that the vast majority of American women use contraception at some point in their life, including
Even Catholic
women. Exactly. And even contraception is prohibited within the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare services. And, you know, if you put a big sign up that said, no birth control here, do you think many patients would come? No, women would seek services elsewhere because it is a needed fundamental service for women. And so part of it, I think, is also about being open and then being willing to be in dialogue about what services women need.
Thank you. This has been something we've been really closely following, and it's a deep question of access in many different ways. Thanks to Lois Utley and to Brian Stiltner, also to Teresa Younger. Dr. Stillberg is going to stay with us. But up next, the other website, the other most incredibly important, this thing absolutely has to work or the whole thing fails website. But first, I want to bring you up to date on one of the strongest storms to ever make landfall in recorded history. Super Typhoon Haiyan, the equivalent of a Category 5 hurricane, with sustained winds of up to 190 miles per hour and gusts of up to 235 miles per hour, slammed into the Philippines early yesterday morning. This storm is bigger than Hurricane Katrina, which hit land in New Orleans with 129 mile per hour winds, and Superstorm Sandy, which hit New Jersey with winds of 94 miles per hour. For some perspective, as this mock-up shows, if Super Typhoon Haiyan were off the eastern coast of the United States, it would stretch from Florida to New York. Thousands of people were forced to evacuate from the path of the storm, but at least 12 million live in the area hardest hit. Rescuers are having a difficult time reaching